Today we're going to start this webinar on its awareness on the Med SECA. As you are all well aware, the Med SECA will enter, let's say, strictly into force on the 1st of May. So we thought it was a good idea to have this chat on the introduction of the Med SECA. Today we have two guests. Fabrizio and I will be the hosts of this webinar. And we have with us two guests, Mercedes and Marcos, with us. The objective of this webinar is that we will cover three main aspects. The first one is related more on the, let's say, legislative framework, let's say, of the Med SECA. On the second part, we will focus a bit more on the inspection, part, what an inspector should do. And then the last part, we will go a bit more, very briefly, on the obligation of the states costing the resiliency and the Med SECA, obviously. Just a heads up, since we have guests from both European countries and non-European countries, the main focus of today will be on the MARPOL Annex 6, let's say, obligations, and we will not touch upon any of the EU legislation in this webinar. Fabrizio, would you like to introduce our guest?
Yes, start our guest and our expert. So, first of all, good morning from my side as well. So today we have Mercedes. She's an officer in the sustainability unit at EMSA, where she manages issues related to the sulfur content on the marine fuel, port reception facilities, and other environmental matters. Marcos, on the other hand, is a naval engineer. He is from the Spanish Maritime Administration and has been temporarily assigned to the capacity building unit.
Okay. So, thank you very much for being with us today. I just forgot to mention that, as I wrote it in the chat, you don't have the possibility of using the microphone or the camera. It's a general practice, let's say, in webinars. Nevertheless, you have the possibility of writing things in the chat. The chat is open. You have the time whenever you want to ask any question when it comes to us talking or anything that pops up in your mind. Just feel free to ask anything. In any case, at the end of the webinar, which will last almost approximately between 50 to 1 hour maximum, you can also write at that moment. We will have, let's say, a time allocation for replying to your questions and answers. But first of all, I think that we can start on the legislative part and we can hear more from our guest. I first wanted to ask to give us a brief overview of the Med SECA and its framework under MARPOL Annex 6, if you can.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Well, to understand the importance of the sulfur emission control areas under the MARPOL Annex 6 framework, we need to understand and recognize the need for a reduction on the sulfur limits in the fuel use on board ships. Because sulfur oxides contribute significantly to the air pollution and to the health-related issues. So the idea with these emission control areas or sulfur emission control areas is to reduce that emissions and to prevent the health people and protect also environment. So this new Med SECA area is the newest addition to the array of current SECA areas, and the idea is that it's reinforced the effort in the Mediterranean to reduce the air pollution from ships.
And speaking about reduction, I mean, there is a reduction of health risks due to the reduction of sulfur content in marine fuel in this case. When we talk about reduction, what do we actually intend as a reduction of how much?
Okay, the idea is the global limit nowadays for the sulfur is 0.50% in mass. So the idea in the SECA areas is to reduce it to 0.10%, which is huge.
Which is quite a big reduction compared to that.
Yeah.
And we are discussing about Med SECA. Obviously, the name suggests that it covers the Mediterranean Sea. But could we be a bit more specific on the geographical limits of the Med SECA?
Okay, all the SECA areas are defined by coordinates, longitude and latitude. So if we see the coordinates or the borders of the Mediterranean, we will see that the western entrance is the Gibraltar Strait. In the northeast, we have the Dardanelles Strait, and in the south, we have the Suez Channel.
Okay. And you can see on the screen the coordinates that are being shown right now. You can see that also on Gibraltar, it's actually a bit more west, that really the entrance of the channel. But Mercedes, I can see that on the Suez Channel specifically, we have 4 points. It's not like as defined as it is on the other two. Could you actually explain what is that little square?
Yeah, this is an area that is there to accommodate the requirements from navigation and operational requirements for the ship traveling in the Suez Channel. So that area, let's say, give them some time to do the changeover when they arrive, or even if they are not going to enter into the neck and then going back to the Suez to avoid the changeover.
The changeover. So it's for
Operational reasons.
it's a mix of operational and navigational reasons. Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned that the Med SECA is the newest addition. So that actually, I think that it means that there is others there. Could you actually give us a bit of an overview of that?
As per Marco, the ones that SECA and ECA areas that have been recognized by IMO, we have 4 areas. 2 in Europe, the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. We have another 2 in America, the North American coast and the United States Caribbean area.
And is there any of some new, let's say, in perspective after let's say the Med SECA?
After the Med SECA, there is an initiative from Norway to designate the territorial waters as emission control area all over Norway. And there is another initiative by the Atlantic countries of Europe, Portugal, Spain, France, and Ireland. They are also, let's say, trying to designate, let's say, the Atlantic part that is not covering the North Sea.
The North Sea.
Joined finally the Mediterranean with the North Sea, so we will have all around Europe.
So basically the whole Europe, like say the European Union coast, would be virtually covered by a SECA.
Yeah, that's the idea.
But the ones that you mentioned that already exist, they are on top of being SECA, they are actually ECAs. So could you tell us a bit the difference of what is the difference between SECA and ECA?
Yeah, when we talk about SECA, we talk about areas that the sulfur emission control areas. The S is for sulfur. But MARPOL also recognize other pollutants and NOx and particle matters. So when we talk about ECAs, it's because these areas are covering everything. So
it's wider.
It's wider. It's to not only reduce the sulfur, but also NOx and particle.
So it's quite of a wider spectrum of pollutants, not only sulfur. No, I think it's important to distinguish between the two because ECAs are much more strict actually than SECAs, and we generally tend to talk about sulfur content in marine fuel, but there is also other pollutant to take into account.
But in this case, it's important to know that the Mediterranean will be only SECA.
Only SECA, exactly.
Only
yeah. And since we were talking about designation, let's say the fact that the Med SECA is one of the new additions and there is others already in the pipeline in terms of new SECA or new ECA, could you just, before going into the inspection part, I would like to know what is the process of getting one? Is it like something that the state comes up with an idea, or is a group of states that try to propose it, and how does that work?
Usually it's a group of member states that propose it to IMO. And for that IMO, in the MARPOL Annex 6 Appendix 3, they establish the requirements to become a SECA. And that cover studies on the area affected by the new SECA area, the traffic in the area, how it's going to affect to the health of the people. So they also need to prepare some assessment taking into account before the SECA and after the SECA, and also a cost analysis. So it's a long process, and it takes several years to be approved in IMO. But I think it's worthy because with the experience that we have nowadays, there is, or it had been seen a reduction in sulfur by 70% all over the world, and it's because of the sulfur emission control areas. So it's worthy to.
No, I mean it is quite of a. It's evidence that such reductions in such legislative, let's say, reduction, they actually have a concrete, let's say, effect on the global. On not only on the health but also on the reduction itself of the pollutant of the sulfur.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I wanted to give a bit of an overview of the legislative part also for our guests. I think that maybe we can move a bit more in the inspection part, which is more the substance of the webinar as well.
Yeah, and for this we have Marcos here. So Marcos, could you start by explaining how a ship can comply with the requirements of SECA?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. As Mercedes mentioned previously, the ships operating within a SECA must use marine fuel oil with a content of no more than 0.10% by mass. And there are two ways to comply with it. One of them is just to buy this fuel, ultra-low sulfur fuel oil, or another method is just to have emission abatement methods on board, such as the well-known scrubbers.
Okay, but what would be the difference between the two in a nutshell?
Okay, the main difference is that if you buy ultra-low sulfur fuel oil, the content is reduced by 0.10. You don't.
It's already there.
It's already there. You don't need to do anything else.
Exactly.
Scrubbers, on the other hand, what they normally do is just to clean the exhaust gases coming from the main engine, auxiliary engines, and other items on board the ship, reducing them to a level equivalent to 0.10.
Which means, if I can interrupt, basically that in the case of scrubbers, the ship operator or the ship can use even a marine fuel with the higher sulfur content oil,
of course.
But then it's the scrubber itself that reduces cleans the exhaust gases.
When we talk about scrubbers, we are talking about only one of the emission abatement.
Yes, of course.
Because
there are many
different kind of
or biofuels on board, but now we are focusing mainly on scrubbers because they are the most
widely.
Yeah. We will discuss later about the scrubbers in details. And now, okay, let's start by talking about this kind of verification of compliance according to MARPOL Annex 6. So, first of all, which are the general documents that the inspector can find and check on?
There are several crucial documents that you can find on board to demonstrate compliance with Annex 6 of MARPOL. Let's say the most well-known ones and the ones that we have to inspect once we are on board are bunker delivery notes, oil record book, oil tank condition report, then the IOPP certificates or documents of compliance, and the changeover procedure and other logbooks to record data on board the ship regarding these operations. Also, we have some kind of calculators on board just to calculate the time for the changeover. And then there are also other documents and certificates, but more focused on other emission abatement methods such as scrubbers.
So it's a long list.
Yeah, it's a long list.
Let's focus a bit on each document to see
the main ones.
Or the main ones, to see which are the main characteristics and details. So you mentioned the bunker delivery note.
Yeah.
So what should an inspector check on the bunker delivery note?
So regarding bunker delivery notes, the most important thing is that to make sure that they are completely filled out, and keeping in mind that there are mandatory data required by this MPC 362-79, And remember that there are also fuel oil samples on board the ship that you can always can check. And we should correspond to these bunker delivery notes.
Okay. And we can see on the screen an example of the bunker delivery note.
Yes.
Yeah, but how long did
Which is, sorry, which is not a real bunker delivery. It's only for the purpose. Said just to no, because there is ship names and IMO numbers, but it's a fake one just for everyone.
And how long these samples, you mentioned samples, how long these samples shall be stored?
So this sample should be stored on board for a minimum of 12 months or until the fuel is substantially consumed, whichever is the later.
Okay.
So, and this is the most important thing.
You also mentioned that amongst the document, the oil record book. No, what should be checked in the oil record?
So, as you know, the oil record book, the most important thing are the entries in this oil record book,
Yes.
which have to be accurate and timely, reflecting the actual operations on board the ship conducted on board the ship. And this record book, although contains logs of fuel transfers, sludge disposal, or even bilge water discharge, but for us, the most important thing is just to focus on the bunker itself,
Exactly.
meaning that everything that has been written there in the oil record book has to match the bunker delivery notes.
Because the idea is that we have to check all the information to see if they are consistent.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle, basically.
Exactly.
Different information in different aspects, not only on documents. Later we'll discuss a bit also about the map of samples, of the sampling, and we need to be sure that all these information taken from different sites are matching, basically, to create a full
same direct
picture. Yes.
Yeah, and there is, just let me mention that there is this circular MPC 1, circular 756, which is a guidance for recording operations in the oil record book. So there you can go there and you just can check the codes that you have to use and the data that should be there in the oil record book.
Okay. You mentioned also certificates,
Yeah.
IEPP and OEPP.
Yeah.
So, which are the checks that should be done in the certificate?
Okay, regarding both IAPP and OIPP certificates, you know, for example, if we focus on the IAPP certificate, what we can learn from this certificate is the number of engines on board. I'm talking about main engine and auxiliary engines, and also the incinerator. And also we can learn if the ship uses compatible fuel when operating in a SECA or ECA area, or if they have emission abatement methods on board. If they have it, you can check the serial number and other items connected to the scrubber, for example. And regarding the OIPP, the most important thing here is to check if there is also a boiler on board.
Yeah.
Because this is also connected with the sulfur emission.
Yeah. But now, apart of these three documents that we made, there is anything else that is worth to check?
Yeah, there is also the oil tank report, or what we call remain on board, something that we have to check, especially when they went for the changeover. We have to check if the quantity of the fuel, which is less than 0.10 in these documents, and this is very important, as well as the changeover procedure itself, and which can be also in paper or even electronic. And we have to make sure that the data coincide. So this is the most important thing, as we have already mentioned before. And if there are clear grounds that there is something which doesn't match, let's say, we should take samples on board.
Yeah, but before going to the samples, you mentioned the changeover procedure.
Yeah.
Which means that at a certain point, the ships change fuel from a certain quantity of sulfur, 0.50 to 0.10. And but what an inspector should verify about this changeover procedure?
So, as you know, the changeover is a written procedure that must be on board the ship, and where you can check, let's say, the switch from 0.5, 0.50 or 0.10. And this step is crucial just to make sure that the ship's crew on board have carried out the changeover procedure in timely. This is the most important thing. So we have to check that the changeover procedure is carefully carried out. This is the most important thing to prevent contamination.
Yes.
From 0.10 to other fuels that they have on board. And to do that, ships have normally on board different kinds of software, such as, for example, the Phobos or any other software. But the most important thing for us is to check if the calculations were carried out properly, because there are a lot of factors that we have to take into consideration.
Yeah, I can imagine also parameters
Exactly.
have been included in the software.
Yeah, because we have to take into account the kind of fuels they have on board, the percentage, also the fuel retained inside the pipes. We have to take a lot of data into consideration.
Okay.
And if their calculations are not correct, it means that they maybe they didn't have enough time to carry out the changeover, and we can detect that.
So the inspector actually needs to check quite a lot of things, especially when it comes to the changeover procedure.
And apart from that, during the changeover, the ship's crew must document or record the volume of 0.10 sulfur content in each type, which is also important, date, time, and position of the ship.
This is why it's important to be very well prepared before going on board.
Exactly. And especially to know the main documents that you should check while you are on board.
It's like in any case, the majority of the inspection that you carry out on board a ship, whether it's a Sulphur inspection or it's any other type of inspection, one of the first step is always to do a documental check and then going actually to verify different things. And it's the same for this kind of checks that you do on board. And but to complement a bit now with Marcus, thank you for giving us a bit of an overview of what an inspector should do in the case of a vessel that is using fuel which has already 0.10% of...
or even more, but...
Yeah. But I want to go explore more of what happens with scrubbers. So one of the main used emission abatement methods. So what does change for an inspector if the ship is using a scrubber? What are the, let's say, main checks that an inspector should do?
Here, in the case of any emission abatement method, the most important thing is to check that the method has been approved by the flag or the flags. So first thing is to ask about the documents. And one important document in this case is the EAPP, because there we will find in section 2.6 information regarding the scrubbers, for instance. It's also important to take into account that the scrubber that is cleaning the emissions could be connected only to the main engine or to the auxiliaries or to both, or even in some cases, they can also be connected to the boiler. So it is important to know which engines are connected to the scrubbers.
And this is all written into the EAPP certificate?
In the EAPP certificate, in the section
2.6.
you will find information about the scrubber, the serial number, and to which engines it's connected.
And you mentioned that this needs to be approved by fact state of the recognized organization acting on its behalf. But the inspector has a possibility of knowing this information in advance or
Verify
this information.
if it's a real approval.
Yes, in IMO thesis, you will find information. It is in IMO thesis, if you click on the Marple Annex 6, there you can find a lot of information. And one is regarding regulation 4 that are equivalent methods for compliance. So, and there you can check by the IMO number of the ship if the ship is fitted with an scrubber and the approval certificate. Okay, it's mandatory.
Yeah,
Sometimes the information is...
Yeah, because flags shall inform IMO about the scrubbers that should be
approved on board. Okay. And on top of the EAPP that we mentioned, and specifically with section 2.6 that we actually have seen on screen just a second ago, is there any other documents that need to be checked when it comes to this type of emission abatement methods? Yes.
When we talk about the scrubbers, there is a long list of documents that has to be checked. And as they are a little bit complicated on a new system, I am also support member states with a guidance. There is a guidance for the approval of emission abatement methods where inspector can find all the information about the different type of approval scrubbers and also a list of documents to be checked.
Okay. And could we go a bit just on the main ones that we need to be checked? Not really going into details of the document itself, but like just to have a bit of an idea.
Yeah, these guidelines are very interesting because they provide or specified criteria for testing, verified certification, and verification of the scrubbers. And the main documents that we can find there are emission compliance plan, the scrubbers record book, where they have to record all the activities, also the technical manual, where they will find information. Because one thing that is important is, let's say, because they are cleaning there. So sometimes the scrubber is not working properly because as per the technical manual, they can only clean sulfur till a certain level. Mm-hmm. So for instance, the 1 point, and the ship is burning 1.5. So the system is not working properly because the technical manual give you the idea of the conditions.
Are there some limitations?
Limitations on the system. So this one important document to be checked and controlled to see how the scrubbers are to work, the limits of the sulfur in the well to proper function.
This is interesting because before we were mentioning obviously that in theory the ship could use any type of fuel because then the scrubber is cleaning the...
But it doesn't mean that the scrubber can work with any kind
of fuel. So it is important for the inspector to check that the limit at which the scrubber can operate doesn't the fuel on board doesn't it's not above this limit of the scrubber.
There are some operational limits that
because I think this is very important to mention it, because sometimes one can think that you have a scrubber on board and it's fine.
Everything is perfect. No,
but no.
Check if the system is really approved for using that type of.
And how can on top, for example, this is one example, but what other checks should an inspector do to verify that the scrubber is actually working properly on board the ship?
Yeah, here, as it's obvious, the ship is burning well about 0.10, so it's not worth it to go to the bunker delivery notes to check what is the sulfur content. So the way that we have for checking compliance in the scrubbers, it's by checking ratio between SO2 and CO2. And there is a correlation between that ratio and the level of sulfur that you have to achieve. I think that we have it now in the screen. So for 0.10 is 4.3. So it's important to check that this ratio is below this 4.3.
And where this ratio is appearing on? I mean, how do you, I understand? Yeah, I understand that this is the ratio that should be checked. But where can we check this ratio?
Okay, scrubbers. I mentioned that they have different type of approval.
Yes.
And the most common ones are the approval by Scheme B, what is called Scheme B. In the guidelines, you can find all the information about it. But in the Scheme B, the scrubbers need to have a continuous monitoring system. It means that there should be a register on board. Usually it's a...
Yeah, we're also showing on screen, yes.
Yes, it's a monitor with all the data. It has to be tamper-proof, so no one can open it and change the register. So it's important to go there and see how these limits or where you can find this ratio and check that it was working properly. So it's the way to check that they are fully under control.
And this is the Scheme B. Scheme B. And so I assume that there is also a Scheme A.
In the Scheme A, there is no requirement for this continuous monitoring, but there is a requirement for daily checking. So it has to be also recorded, these values, helpful to provide evidence that they are under compliance.
So
You need to go to check this daily cycle.
So, I mean, in any case, just to summarize this, so we have a scheme A and a scheme B. With the scheme A, there is a daily check of how the scrubber is working, what is the ratio, while with scheme B, you have a continuous monitoring. So there is a software that automatically checks that it's that continually monitored. And in any case, one of the way of the inspector to verify whether the scrubber is working properly is to verify this ratio, either if it's daily or it's continuous. You still have the possibility of checking whether this was working. So, I mean, this is before going into the obligations part, I think that
it's wanted to discuss a bit about samples, and because Marcus, you mentioned when you talk about the bulk delivery lot, that there are samples on board, labeled and stored for 12 months. No? But can you explain more about the content of the samples?
Yeah, before I was referring to the samples taken during routine bunkering operations.
Yeah, which means that during a bunkering operation, together with the bunker, there is also you receive samples.
Exactly, which have to be kept on board for a certain time. In this case, would be 12 months or even until the whale is consumed. And they have to be properly sealed and stored.
This is important.
This is very important. And then you can validate that all documents match.
Okay.
This is also a bit what we were discussing. Marcos mentioned that the sample needs to be labeled correct. It has to be a seal.
Yeah.
And it is again something that we need to check against the other documentation.
Yeah. And we can see here.
You can see a sample of a Marcos.
Okay, but imagine that, I have a clear grounds, that something is not in compliance with the documentations, or I would like to go a bit deeper. So may I take a sample?
Yeah, of course. You can always take as an inspector, you can always take a sample just on the spot. You have to go there and take the sample, and then this sample will be conveyed by the competent authority to an accredited laboratory
to verify
that the sulfur content is less than the
But where I can take a sample.
Sampling points, fortunately, are now mandatory since 1st of April 2023, so making our lives easier than before. So they should also be indicated in the AIPP certificate and reflected on the relevant piping diagrams. And inspectors can sample the fuel by taking samples from these sample points.
Okay.
So the important thing is that they shall be performed as quickly as possible, as you can imagine, without causing the ship to be unduly delayed.
This is the general rule. Yeah, but are there any common practice to get a sample?
Yes, of course. There are some IMO circulars that detail how to conduct on board this sampling.
Mm-hmm.
However, we have to remember that sampling of fuel oil is always carried out by the ship's crew. This is very important. And the inspector's role is just to be there and to ensure that the process is carried out accurately, safely, and these samples are handled properly.
This is the general rule of control respect.
Exactly.
You ask to the crew to do something that you want to check.
And another important thing is that these samples shall be collected in an appropriate bottle. This is very important. It's stored and sealed by the inspector, and with a unique means of identification installed always in the presence of the ship's representative.
Yeah.
This is the most important thing.
We are seeing on screen a video of sampling that was taken on board with like a real sampling experience. And you also have 2 circulars from MEPC on guidelines on sampling as well, if you want to take a look.
Yep, and as I mentioned, now it is quite easier because you have these sample points are just on the diagrams. So you only have to ask them to show you these diagrams, and from then you can continue with the inspection. So
Okay, clear.
And I think that this sampling part is very interesting and very important to cover. And there is quite some documentation that you can take a look at on how actually to do, like to conduct the sampling.
They may,
Of course.
because in the video we have seen a test.
Yes.
There are some member states that they have these portable devices where they can analyze the sample.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, let's say, in case of something is wrong, they usually send it to the lab. But it's a first
This is
indication.
this is
first check.
for the first indication.
Indication if
Because instead of waiting for the result of the lab, in this way you can have the first indication.
if it is okay, it's perfect. If it is wrong, then you can send it to the lab and with a proper, let's say, analysis.
Yes. It's good that it's shown in the video so that you can actually see what actually happens.
It's not a very heavy equipment or
Yeah.
tool. Yep, to use.
Before going into the obligation of the state, just a question popped up in my mind. Either of you that wants to answer. What happens if a ship goes to a port and doesn't find the fuel oil, then wants to do bunkering, then is compliant? What does that happen? Because we talk about a bit about this FONR, this fuel oil non-availability report, but how does that work in practice? I mean, because it could happen, no? I mean, the ship goes to a port and wants to bunker, and that there is no fuel available. So what did I...
And no fuel with 0.10%.
Yes, yeah. For ship they don't use scrub as I offer.
Yeah, they are not using scrubber and they want to buy the proper fuel. This is the FONR is not an exception, or it's not a white card that they can. So they can do everything, but it's they have to, let's say, to prove that they were trying to buy the proper fuel and it was not possible. So they are running on non-compliant fuel because a reason. But they have to perform this document, the FONR, send it to the flag, to the port, and even to IAM.
Even to IMO, right? Because you can find it in GIS.
In this you can find.
So they have to inform everyone that they did their best.
Yes.
Especially the next port of call, because they are going to be the ones who are going to go on board and just inspect the ship.
Be inspected.
Of course.
And based on this information, they will decide what they are going to do.
Because there is still professional judgment involved.
Yeah, of course. And in the worst case scenario, they can always ask the ship, the bunker.
Which is quite of a heavy measure to be taken.
Yeah. So they have to try to do their best and inform everybody and just to fill out the FONR. And based on that, we will decide that they don't have to deviate from the voyage just to get the fuel.
Of course.
It has to be clear.
And the hosting country that should have a register of
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is also a requirement in the III code. We go a bit over the domain of the webinar.
Yeah.
But for countries that have to abide by the IMO conventions and specifically from the III code, one of the requirements of the port state is to have a register of fuels.
Yeah.
So,
And under Marco Annex 6 to provide proper fuel.
I mean, no, obviously, the III code is just, let's say, a summary of what happens in the convention. But But since we are talking about obligations of the states and we are coming to a close of our webinar, what we discussed obviously about the inspection, but what other obligation a state costing SECA has?
Yeah, first of all, as flag state, they need to be sure that their ships are in full compliance with the new SECA. So they need to issue the proper certificates and to do the checks on their own flag ships to see that they are under compliance. as port state, they have also to check the ship visiting the ports. So, and that will be, I think, it especially important at the beginning of the SECA, because for sure there will be ships not in the knowledge of SECA, the new SECA. So perhaps they are still running at the beginning 0.50. So at the beginning, the checks in the ports should be, let's say, higher.
But I know that in the Paris module, also in the Med module, inspectors are providing also warning letter to inform the ship inspector that the Med SECA is approaching.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, there is another requirement in MARPOL about the port reception facilities in Regulation 70, because ships with the scrubbers will have some residues, and the member state need to provide proper port reception facilities for collecting these residues.
This is another obligation.
It's another obligation, and the MARPOL is not new, let's say.
No, definitely it's not new, but
they are going to have more ships with the scrubber in the port, so they need to be sure that they can provide this
guarantee.
Yeah.
And this is an important point, because sometimes also it's not very immediate to think about that, no? That you actually need at a certain point to discharge this type of residues from the scrubber. And also the member state need to think that they need to have a port reception facility for that, because it's an obligation under law. And what other measures can a state take to ensure compliance with the limits of the Med SECA? Besides the inspection,
Now we are talking about enforcement.
yes, also pure enforcement.
Yeah.
And obviously inspection is or the big
Exactly.
the main
Inspection,
no.
Yeah, the inspection can be considered the first tool, the first step of enforcement. But of course, there are also sanctions. No.
Yes, I understand that the member state has to, have situations where they can apply penalties or fines, or even detain the ship till the ship is under compliance. There are also some IMO guidelines about what to do in case of non-compliant fuel, and it could be also to oblige the ship to bunker proper fuel, or even the bunker. If the bunker on board is not as per the limits, they can also be forced to use the bunker. And
It's important for the coastal fleet also to identify as key failures.
Of course, I mean, it's, and again, here we go a bit more into also the requirements of IMO in general, not related to MARPOL Annex 6. Member states are required to put penalties in place,
Yes,
an effective system of penalties in place, to be sure that you can actually enforce, because it's not only about going on board and inspect the vessel, okay, and then if there is a non-compliance, if there is a violation, then what do you do?
Yeah.
And this is a key point that you also, again, and I mentioned the III code, that you need to have an effective system of penalties in place, because otherwise it's
always the general rules apply. If there are no consequences,
what is the point, right? I mean, it's a basic thing.
Mhm.
And just last question before closing up this round the table between the two of you, and then we leave the floor a bit to our participants. What are the consequences for a ship now, connecting to the penalties? But is there any other possible consequence for a ship that doesn't actually fulfill the limits of the required under MARPOL Annex 6 for the SECA?
Yeah, well, I get that we have talked about sanction penalties. It depends on the country. There are countries with a high level of penalties, because this is considered MARPOL Annex 6 is air pollution and environment protection.
Yeah.
And in some countries, the penalties are very, very high.
well, also my question at the bunkering.
Or just retain the ship.
Detain the ship.
Retain and
I mean, the consequence can be quite costly for the ship operators if they don't comply. It depends. Again, it depends on the system of penalties the state has established. But in principle, there is quite, and this is also connected to reputational damage as well, for the ship owner, that sometimes we don't think of that, but at the beginning of the entry into force of the Paris MOU at the time, the blame and shame policy was one of the main points, also publishing the name of ships and
but the rest of the, I mean, a detention has implication on the flag performance, has implication on the performances of, the entire the ship's company, etc. So, I mean, it's, and also, when a post-control inspector carry out an inspection, what he generally does, he check previous reports.
Yes, of course. So, of course, if you have been already, if you have some history,
Exactly.
that is it's a red flag on the performance of a ship, and that is also taken into account.
Exactly.
Okay, I think that we have concluded a bit what we had, let's say, planned to talk about. I don't think we have forgotten anything. This was really a very quiet and chill talk on what is the Med SECA, what are the main limits, what an inspector should check. I know that some information may be basic for some of you, for some others it's something new. So we try to cover everything to create, let's say, a level playing field between all of us here today and to have a bit of an overview. Fabrizio, do you want to add anything before we actually ask?
No, maybe we can, because I can see that
there is some
many questions on the chat.
We are going to read some of them, and please, from now on, you are really free to write anything in the chat. In case you want any specific question, we open the floor for any question.
Yeah, we just need a bit of time
to read everything.
To read everything.
So there is a question by unknown, okay, I don't know who, and it says, is there a printout for the data stored when it comes to the scrubbers? I think it's more related to what we were showing on screen before.
No, the continuous monitoring. Yes, usually they have the monitor, but I remember sometimes when on more ships with the scrubber, you can ask for a print.
Okay, you can ask to print out
several, one, some.
Also to collect the evidences, also for,
yes, for the inspector.
For the inspector,
you can go and ask for the printout.
You can ask also for the printout.
There is also someone who already replied.
Okay. I was reading the question and I didn't check the reply.
You read,
And
thank you.
Lungaro asks us the fuel oil sulfur limit with regards to emission ratio for CO2 and SO2. Where exactly can we find the limits? Is it available in the technical manual? It's the question over there.
Yeah, it's the limits, but the ratio.
I think it's the ratio. The ratio, no? Which is also what we showed, which you showed on screen.
In the circular, or in the guidelines.
Yeah, in the guidelines.
You can find this ratio, this limit. But then, yes, in the scrubber manual, you will have information about that. Should be below the 4.3.
I can see also that someone mentioned
the guidelines.
The guidelines,
yes. Yeah. And someone says, to my experience, the important figure is mentioned 4.3, which should correspond to the sulfur content of 0.10.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously.
I think that they saw a question regarding what happened if the scrubber is not working.
Yeah, it's just the one. You're the one. I was going in there.
This is interesting. I think.
Yeah.
Interesting question.
That case, if the scrubber is not working, there are also some guidelines from IMO. IMO have a batch of guidelines for everything, and one is for this. And in this case, if the scrubber is not properly working for more than 1 hour, then need to do a changeover.
Yeah.
So it is important that also ships fit with the scrubbers. In case of something happens, they usually have compliant fuel on board.
They have a small, let's say, reservoir of compliant fuel just in case of emergency.
Of emergency, okay, because it's not that as with the phone.
Yeah.
And say, okay, we have been running 6 hours without the scrubbers because it was not working.
Even interesting.
And I think also that the general rule about all state inspection is applicable. If there is an equipment on board that is not working properly, you have to inform immediately that matters the port which are supposed to call. No?
If you don't have any compliant port on board, then you are in a...
What you can get sometimes is just when some parameters are, let's say, outside the limits. As far as I can remember, you can always get some kind of letter. Do you remember, like exemption letter from the flag, but only for specific parameters during a certain amount of time, and that's.
But it's not. You need to be careful with that because sometimes they give an exception for the sensor. So
exactly.
If it is not, if you don't have the sensor working, how you can ensure that you are fulfilling the requirements? So it's something a little bit confusing for me. How someone can give you an exception for, okay, we don't know what are you...
Yeah.
You are over the limit.
Yeah, it's again, I mean, first of all, you have to consider, but these kind of things can be exempted. And it can be exempted, I mean, which are the of course, the consequences.
I think that in that cases, the inspector or the thing, knowledge and adjustment, I think.
Yes. And okay, you should also contact the flags for us to ask additional information. Yeah.
But in that case, when the scrubbers are not working, they need to have some extra oil.
Yeah, because normally here we are talking about maybe they are using 2.5% of sulfur content. So we are not talking about 0.5 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's quite high
sulfur content on board.
Yeah.
If they don't work properly, the emission are very high. Very high.
I really didn't know about this thing that generally ship operators and ships carry. In any case, even if a minimal quantity of compliant fuel, in case the scrap.
There is an additional question about this.
I'm going in order. So Stephen says, for a ship, and I lost it. Okay, see. For a ship without scrubber, it has come into our territory burning non-compliant fuel and it has been detected by our inspectors. In that case, we can apply a fine on non-compliance in our territory. But the question is, what happens to the rest of the voyage where the ship has run on non-compliant fuel which was outside our territory? Can they report it and how can they do that?
I think that they can report it because the MARPOL Annex 6 applies not all over. This, now we are talking about MARPOL 6. I am thinking also on the directive.
I also am thinking about the directive, but now we're talking MARPOL 6.
Applicable to your waters, but it's something related to MARPOL 6 happens outside. You as Port State Control can also take action on that. So you can also, take action on that.
Yeah.
And even if the ship has not compliant port on board, they cannot leave the port without bunker proper fuel. So this is another thing that
another measure that
the Port State people can take.
Okay. Then they ask us, the 2 hours limit for the changeover procedure before entering the SECA area still remains. Is there any time provision for the changeover procedure that you're aware of?
No. It depends on the ships.
It depends on the ship. It depends of the content of sulfur in both fuels. Then it would depend of a lot of things that we are not going to mention here, because if it is a distillate or if it is a residual fuel, it depends on a lot of parameters. So we are not going to go into detail, but using this kind of calculators and using the real data, of course, they have to match, because imagine that you are using 0.06 instead of 0.1. So the time will be different. That is why both should match. And sometimes it's quite complicated, because let's say that in the tank, before they could have on board like a 0.10, and later they add something 0.006. So the media would be different. So we have to be very careful about that. Because depending on the retained fuel inside the pipes, it could take longer to flush out the non-compliant fuel. So let's say that it depends on the ship, depending on the layout of the ship, especially of the piping and the sulfur content they are using on board.
Yeah.
What is important is when the ship is entering in SECA, she has to bear compliant.
Yeah, for sure.
So
from the moment that, let's say, the coordinates are crossed, you should be able to,
yeah.
Of course, I mean, what you can do? You can verify if they are following the written procedure about the changeover, and also to make this kind of...
I think that these 2 hours is mentioned because sometimes it's because of what I mentioned before. Depending on the fuel used on board, if it is residual or distillate, the time you need to, let's say, lower the temperature of one of them, and because they have different temperatures. And normally it takes like 1 hour and more, so they put in the writing procedure, you need at least 2 hours to do that.
But that is more related to the
characteristics
or the chemical characteristics of the fuel, not somebody on the changeover, let's say, in the sense
it could take less than
it could be less than that.
Exactly.
And it is very important what you mentioned as well, that we always talk about 0.10, but it can be even lower.
Lower.
That's 0.10 is the limit, but it can happen.
In any case, we have to be very careful, because when you see this sulfur which is 0.0036, for example, we have maybe it is time just to go on board and just to check it carefully, or even take a sample.
Because
you never know what you can find.
Because where you should spend
more money. So you're saying that it could be, let's say, it could be suspicious.
On the other end, maybe it was the only fuel available
at that time. Yes, could be the case.
Okay. I have another question from. Just a second, because here every time it goes. Okay. In which document we can obtain the proof that the ship has the boiler and the kilowatt power of the boiler, as the boiler is not stated into the ERPP?
No, of course not. That is why I previously mentioned the IOPP, because it's in the certificate that you can find this boiler is there. Although there you are not going to find, as far as I can remember, more information about the boiler. Only the MTC is complying with. But then you can ask, or maybe you can go to the boiler itself and you can take a picture of the placard there, and you can check the characteristics, and you can also ask for more information regarding the boiler on board.
Okay. In line with the previous question, what if the ship is fitted with the scrubber and it is out of order? I think that we replied to that. Yep. It's then Aguado Alvarez, or Jaime, more easily, ask us, open loop scrubber use seawater which is later discharged into marine waters with the waste mixing actions. Is this operation taking into account for the contamination of marine waters? We discussed it a lot in our curriculum for Super Inspector, but I think it's a good point to just have a brief overview of this.
Yeah, so the question is, the scrubbers, this is a discussion that is now taking place in IMO, if open loop should be allowed or not, because it's true that this water contaminates you. So you are changing the air pollution to the water pollution. So there is a huge discussion now in IMO in order to, let's say, ban the open loop scrubbers or the discharge from the open loop scrubber.
So you are transferring.
Yes, but there are some countries that they are forbidden this the discharge from open loop, and in some ports even the ships when entering into ports, sometimes they need to switch to compliant fuel if they don't have the possibility to use closed loop. Let's say they need to go on to switch to compliant fuel, because the use of open loop scrubbers is forbidden in many ports and in many countries.
Don't forget that we we focus on the ratio of CO2, you know, that let's keep in mind that there are also some parameters regarding pH, alkalinity, turbidity that they have to comply with, these scrubbers. It is not only the ratio. So we have to go, to the manual and to check the parameters they have to comply with.
And now we're
going into a very complicated direction. Let's hope that no one has audited that. I'm joking. So, Jose says I'm from Algeciras and is he asking us, talking about scrubbers, any waiver in time if the ratio is not under the mandatory one? So how many hours could be running without comply with the ratio? Okay, so if I understand well, what happens if you add the logs in case of skim B, and then for, I don't know, 2 hours? Yes. It's not, it's the ratio is above, it's 4.6. I don't know how it works, but like let's say.
No,
how much time we can put?
Yeah, is that at all?
1 hour.
Maximum, there is, there is a provision.
Yes.
Okay. So the tolerance is 1 hour.
It's 1 hour. But they need to be careful because sometimes this ratio shows 0. And 0
doesn't mean
it doesn't mean that it's working. Perhaps it's not working.
Maybe it's a malfunction of the system.
So sometimes when you see a lot of 0, 0, 0, 0, say, okay, it's kind of compliant because it's 0.
It's perfect.
No, it's take care also about that because sometimes it is because it's not working properly, it's a malfunction or it's not. So
okay.
At 1 hour.
There's another interesting question. Tanks with very fuel, very low sulfur,
which is 0.50, right? The very low fuel sulfur.
Oh, 0.50.
Yeah. Must be sealed inside SECA.
Like similar, there are not any problems.
No, regards. Honestly,
as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
No, I think that the only ban is to carry 0.50 sulfur content fuel oil if it is used for fuel.
But you can carry it.
You can carry 0.50 up to 0.50 to be used as fuel.
Yeah, and it could be also 0.53. I think that is the maximum.
Well, but this is the test. The limits.
For the limits.
But there is a ban of carriage.
But to be sealed, I don't.
But to be sealed?
No.
No.
Honestly, because imagine that there shall be sealed. And okay. And
no, because at some point you are flushing out this 0.5 and put in the 0.1.
Yes, but this ship is going out SECA area. So what they should do? They should seal the tank. So I don't think so. But honestly, I will double check.
Yeah,
I will double check.
And just to remind why there is a ban on above 0.50 is because the global limit of 0.50.
Yes, it's 0.50. Yeah. So it's
so it's a ban on having. If you don't have a scrubber on board, why should you carry a fuel that is above 0.50?
Yeah.
Because you cannot use it as fuel. There is an unknown question on penalties. Is a bit. I don't know if you can reply, but it's why are the penalties not the same in the EU but differentiate between member states?
Okay, because there is no EU legislation on penalties. It's open to the member states. It's something that member states want to keep by their own. They want to decide what type of penalties. So that is one of the reasons that there is not that uniform, let's say, penalties. Perhaps in the future could be because they are working in some legislation on penalties to, let's say, harmonize the system. Yeah. But nowadays, there is no European legislation.
Yeah. Great. So in case of a scrub, is a must to check for the existence of compliance fuel.
As far as the system is working properly, I cannot see that. Of course, there is something wrong. We should have we should have something on board.
Yeah, but it's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory. It's not mandatory, right? As far as the system is working,
Because the system is working, you can use even
Exactly.
fuel up on the limit.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
of course.
you can use it if you are out of the system. Out of compliance.
Now we are going some details. So what about an open loop scrubber without the ability to retain waste on board and enter a port where its use is prohibited?
But then if it is your port, you have to issue a penalty.
See,
Yeah. The ship needs to know what type of scrubbers are allowed to
I
use.
allow
this
So usually the agents or before enter into the port.
I have a question about that. This type of ports, are there any way to inform in advance the ships that the open loop is not
It's not allowed. Because I think that's also local legislation that applies here. No? So it's
Realization.
That is why I mentioned the agents, because the agents used to work in the port, so they are aware of all the different rules in the port.
Requirements.
So they have to inform the ships, say, okay, you can enter here, but
be careful
yeah,
because
if you are using open loop, your open loop are not allowed to switch off. So all this information through the agent, but it's in the case of if it is forbidden and the ship is using the open loop, then it's the right to the inspector to issue a penalty or some whatever.
So what is best in case of ships with scrubber is to have both kinds of fuel in case of scrubbers not working. This is repeating what we were mentioning before.
Exactly.
And then
Which is okay, yeah.
I answered to the question about the boiler. The data about kilowatt must be included in the EGCC. Yes,
but this is Paula.
It's answer where you can find specific information, sir.
Hi, Paula.
Okay. Reached B says if the ship is equipped with an AGTS as an equivalent means of sulfur oxide compliance, how the POSEC control should verify that the system is properly functioning, which is more or less what we mentioned but we should check if I recall correctly what we mentioned during the, let's say, the webinar part is we need to check the monitoring, right? The report, the ratio in the report. So basically, you as an inspector should ask whether it's scheme B, that you have a continuous monitoring. So you have this sort of Excel that we showed before on screen, where you have the ratio in regular intervals. I don't know if it's every minute, every 30 minutes, but it's in any case, it's it's very, let's say, detailed. Okay. Or in case of scheme A, then you have it once a daily, but you still have a log. So in both cases, you have a log, let's say, generated by the scrubber, where you can check this with this ratio that has to be below 4.3.
Okay. Yes. In the case of, yes, I can answer.
Okay. Yeah.
So far, last question.
Okay, a small question regarding the fuel sample accompanied by the bunker delivery note. Does this sample need to be specifically the marble sample, or any sample listed in the bunker delivery note that is not labeled as marble will do? If I correctly understood,
it's really the label on top.
Yeah, our Noel is asking, should be mentioned that it is a marble sample related to the sulfur content.
I mean, I wouldn't know if it has to be really labeled as marble, or it's more important the fact that it's.
We need to check the circular and the data that should be there.
Yeah,
but I don't think that is mentioned something very specific like this. But we need to cross.
Yeah. To cross-check, I mean, if there is a specific
wording, exact
quest.
As far as I can remember, there is no, but we need to Check.
Okay, because the regulation list it has marble delivered sample.
Yeah.
There are many times that the ship does not have this sample. Okay,
It's awful.
this is different. Yeah, because as far as I know, I mean the sample
They must be
Yes, at least you
Yeah.
here.
12 months. Yes. 12 months.
I cannot say okay.
Until the this
Or until at least 12 months.
yes.
They cannot say during the delivery they did provide.
No, that is mandatory.
Yeah, mandatory.
Someone knows if nowadays IMO is working on a global harmonized system for air pollution penalties to avoid the differences between countries and port. Yeah, that's very complicated to achieve. If to have an harmonized system of penalties. Mercedes was mentioning before, this is not only valid for EU member states, it's valid for everyone.
But even you can imagine if in the EU is difficult, you can imagine the level.
I mean,
it is
these
worldwide
penalties, and it's a very intimate component of a state. Like it's really decided to from the state. It's very complicated to impose something from a supranational entity or an international organization, because it's really a prerogative of the state to decide the system of penalties in place, which are commensurate in any case to the place. I mean, there are so many peculiarities,
but it would be different also. No?
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to read the Alicia question?
Is the emergency generator include? No, sorry. In which document the combustion machinery, main engine and auxiliary engine, and its power is stated if the keel of ship is laid down before year 2000? Because in this case, it is not stated in EAPP, and also EAPP is not mandatory. I have to read again.
So basically, before 2000, the AIPP was not mandatory, I would assume. So where could we find the power of the engines?
But the certificate was not mandatory. Okay. Now in 2025, you will find the certificate. But it's never so much it's spoke like I didn't.
Manuals.
In the manual, of course.
Manual.
In
The manual of the engine.
Yes.
Great.
Maybe we can check that and come back to the question, okay? I think it's more appropriate. Let's go to the last question so far. Is the emergency generator included in the rules for low sulfur?
Yeah, of course.
Also, that is included into
Emergency generators, also
because all the generators are
incinerator and also the boiler.
and the boiler. Yeah, we mentioned it. Main engine and auxiliary engines.
If they are not using ultra low sulfur fuel oil in this SECA area, for example,
it's a breach. It's a violation.
exactly.
Okay, there are some additional information about the
Machinery ban.
question. Yes, yeah, when NOx is not applied, and also
It also is like it says ask for machinery manuals and also the tag labels. It's written over there.
yeah.
So, any other questions? Okay. In some cases, engines are not described in the EAPP. What do we do in that case?
Try to get information from the captain
Or the chief engineer?
engineer is the only thing we can do. And just remember that in some cases, for example, if flags have not ratified Annex 6 of MARPOL, maybe we will find on board this document of compliance, which is normal, not updated. So that is, we have to go case by case.
Okay. I like this question. Go ahead. I like scenario and question. It's super well organized. Go ahead.
Thanks, Rashid. I know him very well. And a post-state control officer initiates a thorough analysis for SOX compliance under MARPOL Annex 6. The laboratory results, taking 1 day, arrive after the post-state control has already permitted the ship to depart. The analysis reveals no compliance with a sulfur emission control area. Question: what anchor should you think? This is
a practical scenario.
it's a practical scenario. This is unfortunately that it can happen.
But
And
once the ship left,
that for sure,
you can use supply, depending on the country, you can.
for sure, you have to inform the next port of call.
Yes.
That's also you have to provide information about this situation. In some countries, it's possible also to notify the sanction to the depends to the ship's company or even to the agent, etc. There are some, but it's
In some countries, there's also the possibility to retain some money before the ship.
Yeah, but the things here, the ship has left.
yeah,
Cannot do anything about it.
yeah.
Depends on the country.
Yeah, it depends on the countries. It's possible to notify after the time that the ship left the port to notify a sanction. But generally today,
More connected to the legal actions they can take.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Or wait for on the ship
To come back.
come back.
Yes.
Issue the penalty.
A penalty in this case.
It's connected to Rashid's question.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we have no other questions for the time being. We'll leave it just a couple of seconds more to let anyone. In the meantime, I think that we can give our closing remarks.
Yeah. I think that we have reached the end of today's webinar. We covered the 3 domains that we considered at the beginning. The legal part, the inspection, and also the obligation from the state. So I had to thank Marcos and Mercedes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just let me say, this was our first, let's say, full webinar that done in this format. Obviously, I know that there have been others in EMSA, but this is the first time that we do that from our studio. I hope that it went well. I also need to thank our background staff that has helped us today to organize this webinar. It has been quite an intensive couple of weeks to make it work as it did today. I hope that you appreciate it. I need to thank again very much Marcos and Mercedes for being with us today. And for any other information, you can reach me or anyone by email. We will try to add any information that you would like. And in case you are the participant of our next curriculum for Sulphur inspectors, you will find us in any case there as the subject matter expert and facilitators. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Someone asked, I missed the first hour of the seminar.
I will read.
With the reply provided, please.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Oh.
Yeah.